we actually jump in. Okay, so hi everybody. My name is Kaylin Browning, and I am transitioning in as the new assistant director for the Birth Circle. So this is my first meeting doing that, and we have Myra on here, who has been the wonderful assistant director for, how long have you been the assistant director, Myra, up until now?
Just a little over a year.
Okay. Yeah, so
But
she's been serving the Birth Circle wonderfully for this last year. So we're going to be sad to see her go, but she's moving on to some exciting things for her family right now, and still, of course, intends to be connected. So thanks to everybody for hopping on. Thanks, Myra, for being here. And we have Julie and Cassie on here today, Julie Gladney and Cassie Meek. They are some of our local breastfeeding experts who we are privileged to be able to connect with throughout the year in lots of different ways and to partner with to bring resources to the local parents in our area. But before we jump into all of the great stuff they have for us about breastfeeding today, maybe we should go around and kind of treat this a little bit like we would if we were at an in-person Birth Circle meeting and just introduce ourselves. You want to share about how many kids you have, or if you're pregnant, any details about that you'd like to share, about like how far along you are or anything like that. And if you have a birth story that you would like to share, the Birth Circle is of course founded upon women being able to come together and share their birth stories and really explore and process that just through sharing and talking with other people. So we want to be a space for time and room for that as well. So I know I just kind of already introduced myself a little bit, but as far as more personal stuff goes, I have 4 children, ages 8, 6, 4, and 2. And I am also a birth doula and a childbirth educator, and I do placenta encapsulation. So birth stuff is kind of my life and my obsession, and I'm happy to be able to be here with you guys. I guess, Myra, I'll pass it to you next.
all right. So my name is Maida. I have 2 kids. One is 8, 7. Sorry, not 8 yet. Missing the math a little bit. And the other one's turning 4 next month. And with everything that's going around, I know that everybody's a bit crazy, and our lives are crazy. And with 2 jobs, unfortunately, I feel sad to say that I'm leaving the Birth Circle for some time. But as soon as I have a little time and life becomes a little bit normal, I will be happy to help them as much as I can.
I'm Rebecca. I'm a board member for the Birth Circle. I've got one daughter, Kylie, who's going to be 2 in October, and we're trying for baby number 2 soon. So hopefully we'll have some good luck as far as that goes. And,
Tacos. Yeah. Tacos.
Then she's over there talking about tacos right now.
I'll volunteer myself. I'm Julie Gladney. I am a private practice lactation consultant, IBCLC, and I am the mother of 5, 4 living children, ages 18 and a half. I've been doing the same thing with the 8. My 7-year-old turns 8 in a couple days, but I've been doing it for about 3 months that I've been calling her 8, and I'm like, wait, you're not there yet. So 18 and a half, 15, nearly 8, and Sophie's 4 now. And I've had a variety of breastfeeding experiences, and I started as a breastfeeding peer helper at WIC. And yeah, it's been a crazy journey, and I'm still kind of working in this area and trying to make it my full-time career, carving my own little spot out. But yeah, that's me.
I'm Cassie. I am with Athens La Leche League. I have been a leader for 10 plus years now, which is crazy to think about. But my oldest is 13. I've got a couple kids in the middle there, and then my youngest is 5. So yeah, nursing has been my life for quite some time. And I've been a part of the birth circle since right after it started, actually. So, yeah, that's who I am.
So I think Kaylin might have dropped her call. I don't know what happened. So you guys can start your presentation. I don't know if you had a setup, how you going to do, or if you're going to start with one another, or if you're going to present together or separately. So
We don't really have a set plan. Cassie and I
okay.
love to go up and talk about breastfeeding.
Okay.
Cassie, unmute yourself so we can do this together, I think. So, Cassie, what do you know, I've kind of been involved, very similar timeline as Cassie, as far as La Leche League, and we had some similar mentors at that time. And it is interesting to see kind of how things change over time. Things are very different supporting breastfeeding at this point, certainly in 2020 during this pandemic, a lot this way via video, and that's totally different than what we're used to. Although me and Cassie both have kind of dabbled in digital help. What do you think's different now, Cassie?
Right now, it's just a lot more different where I'm getting more phone calls like we used to about 5 or 10 years ago, where I'm getting phone calls and texts and Facebook messages about common things like color of poop. Is my baby getting enough? And that's really nice because I like answering those questions and I like supporting those moms because that's what I can answer. That's what I'm here for, is just to listen and make sure that you know what you're doing, and to trust your mother's instincts. But before COVID hit, I was getting more phone calls and texts and messages about numerous things that were out of my realm. It was more for IBCLCs to handle. It was more of a medical situation each phone call. So it's interesting to watch everybody kind of come together with that, because I know in the forums they're talking more about tongue tie. They're talking more about what color should my baby's poop be. And here they're allowed to have just the partner in the room. So I've also had moms ask about that. And then I believe Michelle at the hospital was out for a while and doing telehealth. And I'm not sure, I think I texted you about that, Julie. I don't know if she's back in her office yet or not, but I know that I did get a lot of phone calls because the moms left, you know, and right when you leave the hospital, your milk comes in when you get home. So I was having a lot of phone calls, FaceTimes, with moms with brand new babies and making sure that they were set up correctly. So
Yeah.
that's what I'm noticing is a little bit different nowadays.
Yeah, absolutely. We did have a little period of time there from March through really, I mean, Michelle just got back to the hospital at the end of July, I believe. And she, you missed that beginning part. I was telling everyone about the breastfeeding advocacy group tomorrow. And I know that's a bad time. We're going to work on getting a better time. I'm not really sure why we picked that time, honestly, but we're going to figure out a better time, because it used to be convenient during lunch hour to everyone to go. And now that's just not the case anymore with Zoom. So we'll have to figure that out. But I was mentioning that Penny Williams, RN IBCLC, is the new Michelle at the hospital for the lactation program. And I believe that Michelle has been back since the end of July training Penny. And so tomorrow they're gonna introduce us to Penny. And then Michelle's gonna remain involved with the advocacy group, which that makes her happy to stay involved, and not, I can imagine, hard to kind of unwind and fully let go of something that, you know, she's been involved with for so many years and was one of our very instrumental people in breastfeeding. So it did present some unique situations though, and I think it did highlight the need for more breastfeeding skilled help and support in our community. And, you know, not having an oral exam during your hospital stay or even meeting with an IBCLC in person definitely had effects And so I would agree with Cassie that we had some tumultuous times early on, and then there was even a period of time where Dr. Wright's office was closed. I think everyone here knows Dr. Wright and her wonderful osteopathic work on babies. And so, yeah, we were kind of in a position for a little while there, and I was having a lot of video calls, and then I did open my office back up, you know, trying to balance the video with the in-person when necessary. But yeah, it's definitely highlighted some new issues because Wick stopped seeing people in person. Michelle wasn't at the hospital anymore, you know, and so then that was clearly reflected in Cassie getting more phone calls and myself, you know, and having to adapt to these new mediums. And it's difficult, you know, to do what we do over a video is a real big challenge. And like I said, I had some experience in that area already before COVID hit. I had been kind of doing some video calls, but it's a real challenge when you don't have access to the person in front of you. So what do you have to say about that, Cassie?
It just makes for interesting FaceTimes. It makes for interesting photos. I mean,
Right.
you get, it just makes, it makes the investigation process a little bit more involved.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm used to doing the phone calls. So usually those nice, easy questions are nice that way. But then whenever things kind of like, well, this might be a Julie thing, that's when I ask to FaceTime if they're comfortable. And then I also ask, you know, if, you know, because I don't have a privacy policy, I have to talk to them about that briefly. Same with pictures, if they're going to send me pictures of anything going on with baby or mom.
Right.
But otherwise, we've made it work. A lot of the moms seem to like it because they're too scared to go to too many appointments right away.
Right.
And they're also still going to those appointments, like their checkup.
Do this and have that in the background, Lena.
And it's interesting just because some of the moms are being told not to checkup appointment with baby. When it's a newborn, moms are needing more coaching with how they can either, you know, stand up for that right to bring their baby with them, or to how to coach the partner in the car while mom goes in without baby. So I've dealt with that too. But for the most part, it's gone really well. I'm pretty used to not being hands-on since everything went digital a few years ago, as far as support goes. But I am excited for it to eventually be back to the potential of being in someone's home and meeting them and getting to help them with the baby. So that might be the silver lining in this, is by the time all of this hopefully is over, everyone's going to be really ready for some human contact, and we can get back out there and be more available physically rather than just on the phone.
Absolutely. And those are good points too. I had forgotten about the partner thing going into those visits. I had started to hear a little bit about that. And I think it has highlighted some holes in our system, as COVID loves to do with every other aspect of our life, is highlight the problems with our former system. But as far as the whole, like, what happens in the first month with breastfeeding, and, you know, when we're dealing with normal breastfeeding, things are pretty smooth during that time, and we can just kind of make sure that, you know, babies are meeting certain basic criteria. But when it comes to really repairing a more in-depth, more severe situation, it really makes it extraordinarily difficult. I had to move to kind of getting more baby scales so that I could drop scales off on people's front porches so they had it there during the Zoom call. So then we had some data to go, because it's just really hard to, like, I can't assess a baby's weight, you know, particularly when we're talking about tongue tie or other underlying condition that's affecting breastfeeding. So that's been challenging. But you know, I think, like Cassie said, it's all kind of for the good, because it is gonna, it's good to innovate and figure out how to do this stuff, you know, I think that's the most interesting part, really. And I keep thinking in my mind that maybe we can meet outside. What do you think about that?
Right now, the Leche League just set out a nationwide email stating that we can't even do that right now. I guess some groups were trying to meet outside. But at this point, we're still told not to do it. We can hold virtual meetings, which I've not gone into yet, because honestly, the other part of it is that, you know, for myself, it is a volunteer job, but I'm now working full time again. But before that, I was home with the kids, homeschooling them because school was out for a long time. And now it's about to be out again. So balancing that is even harder, because sometimes I get a phone call and I can't, when I was just staying at home homeschooling everybody, it was hard to get to my phone very often. But when I did make time for it, you know, it was nice. But that's the other thing to think about, is like all of these people who may not have jobs right away are given this opportunity to try nursing. So a lot of the people that I've talked to are actually trying nursing longer than they would have originally, because unfortunately they lost their jobs. And then also, unfortunately, they weren't able to access care like WIC. So unfortunately, they weren't able to get the help with formula or nursing. But that's my other concern, is that I'm not getting as many formula phone calls as I have, because I also do help moms either stop or start nursing. And then I also give them as much information as I have on formula feeding, how to do it properly. So I haven't had as many formula feeding mamas, or pumping exclusively mamas like I used to, since COVID hit. So I'm having more of the 10 years ago phone calls more now. So I'm just wondering, when, because of COVID, when are my nursing working moms going to be reaching out? And or they're already out there doing it. Maybe they've figured it out, because I feel like people have gotten really good at finding support systems online because of COVID. And that's wonderful to me. I mean, it's terrible that we can't meet in person, but I think it's definitely going to be a really terribly odd reset button, at least in our community.
And I agree too, you know, because some people, if they're working at home, they, you know, maybe they have their baby with them more, or pumping is definitely easier if they're away from their baby or have help with their baby, while, you know, it's that whole, like, how are we doing 35 roles at one single time? And it's really kind of coming to a point here with school starting, like you're saying, and the teachers, or school starting but not starting is the whole thing, you know, with everyone. And so that's one segment, but then there's the other segment of society that, you know, they're pushed even more because they're in those essential jobs and the grocery stores, or you know, so again, it's like making, and we're aware of this and other, you know, social kind of assessments of what's happened since COVID. But when we talk about breastfeeding specifically, it's just like really kind of increasing that whole disparity in access to care and time. You know, it's just really kind of interesting what's actually occurring. I am working on a project with the Ohio Lactation Consultant Association, advocating directly to Medicaid about coverage of lactation services. And part of it feels like, is this the right time to be doing this? You know, with all these other things, there's like higher priorities, but really this is the higher priority. And once we kind of reminded ourselves about that and keep kind of pushing through, it's really becoming quite an involved project. So if anyone has suggestions of anyone at OU, Boynton Ridge Center, anyone at all that is interested or working on health related products based on, or projects based on data, you know, research data and affecting policy, that's kind of like what we're doing basically. And so, yeah, Medicaid hasn't been super easy. They gave us lots of like verbal positive, we know that lactation consultants help, you know, all this verbal positive feedback, but nothing has really come directly from it. And so we're having to kind of redraw our plan here. But there's actually a lot of legislation relating to maternal and infant health right now in the Ohio legislature. There's a doula bill. that includes aspects about mitigating the impacts of racism. So it's really quite, and then the other declaring racism a public health issue that can help address some of these disparities. It's really just kind of an interesting time. So I encourage you guys all to check out that I'm usually not someone who's super involved with like legislative items, but this is a really interesting time. And so I'd encourage all of you guys to kind of check that out and see what parts of it you can support.
Yeah, I think that it's just on another encouraging note, be encouraging to your family and friends. Anybody that's at home with even not a nursling at home, I think that a lot of parents need that outlet. So check in on your neighbors, out on your friend who lives in California or Australia or anywhere, because I'm finding that I'm making more connections with people who I haven't talked to in years because of COVID, due to where they live with their quarantines. And I'm learning more about them, but I'm also able to support them in different ways as a leader without them knowing that that's what ends up happening. But it's nice to talk to them about their nurslings, talk about their nursing experience, and just find out more about their lives. So joining online groups is wonderful. And it's just encouraging that more and more people are making that connection and helping each other through it. So for me as a leader, I really encourage everyone to reach out and be available to your friends and family who, whether they have nurslings or not, just so that they have that outlet for support.
It's funny you say that, because it reminds me of all the comments over the years at birth circle meetings about how we need a teen birth circle, or an older child support parenting.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I agree with you that parents and mothers in particular are really struggling just because of all the roles that are stacked up and the restrictions, where we have to kind of really, really, really think outside of the box and innovate new ways of coping, really, I think. So do you guys have any questions for us? Anything anyone else wants to talk about?
Do you know much about the new lactation consultant at the hospital? What's her background and where she's from?
So all that I know is that, let's see, she's an RN, IBCLC, and she was at, I believe she worked at the DINA before. It's where she's coming from, and she's been in IBCLC for about 5 years, and that's about all I know. So I know Michelle is both looking forward to retiring, but also I can imagine the stress involved with passing off that child that she's created there at the hospital. So I'm really happy that she wants to stay involved with the advocacy group. And we're kind of really trying to turn that, back when I first started in supporting moms, when I was at WIC, I had, we have some really high caliber minds and mentors in the field of lactation that have associations with Athens. So if you guys have ever read Jackie Wolf's books, they're pretty amazing on kind of the history of infant feeding in the early 1900s and public health at that time. So she's pretty amazing. And then also Michelle, I've learned so much from Michelle, but our group used to kind of do more like creating, gathering articles and making kind of a newsletter to send to physicians related to evidence-based topics. A lot of times they were written by physicians and they were sent to the physicians just to educate on some of these topics that we know they don't get training on. And so then we kind of morphed into more like we just kind of update each other on what our organizations are doing. And that's about all we had time for, because we didn't see each other that often. So we were just kind of chatty the whole time on just what was going on. But we're trying to kind of get back to that advocacy part where we're actually having a goal and working on things. So I'm kind of hopeful that might be able to kind of assist that OLCA, Ohio Lactation Consultant Project. So please join us and help us out to do something, because we just really do have some amazing people in the Athens community that know about breastfeeding and support breastfeeding. And we've always kind of known about this special community that we have here that's really more close to a true breastfeeding culture than a lot of other places. And so I think we just have a lot to share if we can kind of get a good message together. But Cassie, I'd be willing to try to do a Zoom. I know your time as far as that for having a La Leche. It's kind of nice to practice here with the birth circle. So thanks guys for doing this as well. Because it's kind of hard to imagine how this would go as far as breastfeeding support. You know, I'm thinking of how my kids' Zoom calls go. But obviously it's different when we're talking, you know, but I think it could work, and I'm willing if anyone else wants to kind of help spearhead it, or, you know, just to kind of help be the moderators. I'm willing to fit that in if other people want to kind of help. I've been tossing around the idea of how to do it or when, because again, the time thing is all changing now too. Like what used to be convenient before COVID isn't anymore or even workable. So I think the time of what is the best time to catch people is still a not fully defined question.
Yeah, I think on Facebook with your Athens breastfeeding group, I believe there's a whole new thing where you can, you know, create a room. And that could be really beneficial if we feed from that group itself. And if you haven't joined that group, you should join that group. Julie moderates that group. It's the Athens breastfeeding. It's just the Athens breastfeeding group, isn't it? Is that what it's called? By
Athens breastfeeding discussion, and then led by IBCL. It's the only Athens related one on there, but yeah, that's an interesting point. I forgot about all that kind of Facebook group or room stuff.
It could be a way to have a room, and I would have to, you know, research a little bit more with people dropping in and out and what that involves with you. And
yeah, I would have to have specific guidelines, but I think we could probably make that work still. My thing is that, you know, maybe, I don't know, I worry about a little bit about the real quality of the connection through that system, but also the obviously it's privacy related things, where I have like a more secure Zoom account too that we could start from, or just announce it there, but we can brainstorm about that. I think your point though about we both have experience, or not necessarily experience, but we both support non-breast, you know, other methods of feeding moms as well. And I kind of think that people don't want to contact us sometimes, although I do get the calls too from both breastfed and bottle feeding families. But sometimes they might shy away from calling us just because of the emphasis on lactation and you know, breastfeeding that we have. But just so everyone's kind of aware that we do support all types of feeding parents, and are pretty educated in those areas also. I guess the other exciting news about our community is Amber Coppinger has been working with Dr. Wright to, I believe that Amber's been an osteopathic physician for a long time, but recently did the pediatric version to learn about babies and tongue tie. So with it, basically so that we have more than one Dr. Wright, which is amazing to have. So she deserves that backup, and just having more options of trained people is wonderful. And I believe there is a speech and language pathologist who's also going to be getting tongue tie specific training. So it's really nice to see our things kind of evolving and more diverse professionals studying that one particular topic, which is really cool.
Yeah, that is great, because I remember it was kind of hard to get into her sometimes. Like she would make, you know, a priority for, you know, the newborns and stuff that needed to get in. She would kind of clear her schedule a little bit, but you know, we made sure to schedule before we left that visit so that we could get back in with her again.
Yeah, absolutely. And that has been a huge challenge just with everything kind of changing. So I know Dr. Wright is relieved to have someone to kind of trade off with, and Ember is, diving right into learning a lot about it. So it's a good situation for our community for sure.
That's fantastic. And so I'm sure we will be working to update the Birth Circle website's resources list to include those people too. I might try to get with you after this, or if you think of it, shoot me a message with those exact names again so I can
Absolutely
make sure to put that on there.
I haven't looked at that list for a while, so I'll go take a look, and I can probably help you guys update it, just
Yeah.
knowing kind of what's going on in the community. And I know that Michelle is supposed to be updating her list too, that goes home with all the moms after their babies are born. So make sure everybody's on the same.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. And so I'm so sorry, guys, that I disappeared for a minute earlier. I just one phone problem after another today. So I kind of missed a little bit of the beginning of when you two were talking at first. So did you get to go into much depth about the specific things you offer? When I came in, you were talking more about how COVID has kind of stopped a lot of things, but for those moms, pregnant moms or breastfeeding moms who are listening to this now or in the future, did you guys get to break down, all the value that you guys bring?
I don't know that we did that specifically. Cassie did talk about kind of what she does and what's changed for her kind of with COVID, and also some restrictions that La Leche League has kind of said. We had briefly talked about maybe meeting outside in a group setting.
Yeah, I heard that.
He had said that La Leche League isn't able to do that right now.
Right.
And so then we kind of went to that Zoom support, and I'm glad that you guys set this call up, because it's kind of a nice practice for how a online breastfeeding support situation would go, because it's kind of hard to imagine, transitioning. But I'll talk a little about myself, and then we can go back to detail. I basically have an office, and I provide clinical lactation support, but I will help anyone that breastfeeding problems as well. Although I tend to not get calls about normal stuff. People just generally, if they don't need me, they don't contact me, which is fine. I tend to get much bigger problems. But I do work with some insurance companies. I'm able to bill Anthem and Aetna, and those are the main two. I am technically in network with a couple others, but I haven't actually worked out them actually paying for things yet. So that's always a unique challenge. And to be honest, I've been kind of distracted with this Medicaid thing, because the timing feels right, that now is the time that we need to advocate for this based on what's happening. And so I've kind of been a little distracted at that. But like I said, I do have an office, so I offer in-person visits and video calls, or kind of a hybrid combination of both, depending on what we need and at what stage. Tongue tie has come up. I focus on tongue tie a lot, just because it tends to cause massive problems when it is present. And so that is usually kind of ongoing. It's a rehabilitation that takes many visits with Dr. Wright and with me, depending on the details. So I kind of do office visits, but then also video when we need to. Yeah, so that's me. I'm always kind of evolving and trying to just figure out new ways to do things. But that's pretty much my service list. Cassie, what about you?
So myself and a few other leaders, we are available on Facebook Messenger. So when you do message us that way, generally you'll get me, and then Sherry does come in there every once in a while, probably more often than I do. We don't get as many Facebook messages as I get text messages. And the other leaders, they do get messages and phone calls. So you can either text, call, Facebook message us anytime, 24/7. If the person's asleep, as soon as they wake up, they will give you a call or a text back as soon as they can. But with the Leche League, it's all about parent-to-parent support. So we may not be able to answer right away because of our family commitments at that moment, but we do give you a call or a text back as soon as we get it. But I'm mainly parent-to-parent support. So I help anyone that is, no matter how you're feeding your baby, I help you before you get to the hospital or have your home birth. And afterwards, I help you if you've lost a child and you don't want to nurse anymore. You know, that this, it's huge what I can offer support for. And I'm trained to have all of the questions. That way, once it becomes medical, I can put a stop to it, get the information I need, and pass you along to Julie primarily. If you give birth at the hospital, you do have access to that IBCLC, but that doesn't limit you just to that hospital IBCLC. So I generally give out both information, especially if you gave birth at the hospital. But that's where I do it. I don't call it referring. I just pass you to the next person in line because I'm not trained medically to take care of you. And then obviously I'm there for support before, after, and during the care that you're receiving from the IBCLCs if needed. A lot of the times I help moms with postpartum, make sure that they get to their follow-up appointments, make sure that if they want to keep nursing, I support them through that. And if they want to stop, we stop. But that's really what I do, and I'm available all of the time, and I try to make it a priority at the end of my workday or on my lunch break to get back to everybody. If it's during the week, and on the weekends, I'm pretty available to support all the families. And it's not limited to this county. I actually support people in other states too, because they find my phone number. And then I have to work with other leaders or IBCLCs that I can find through online mainly, or Julie if needed, and then help them find who they need too. So if you're having a friend or a family member in need and they live anywhere, they can reach out to me. I can find a leader that's closer if needed, but right now, during COVID, I could support whoever, wherever they live, because there's no hope for me coming in your house anytime soon. But once that's lifted, obviously I would help them find a leader or an IBCLC in their area. So, but that's what I do.
And then I would just add that I think, it's good to talk about the fact that it's really best case scenario to talk to someone prenatally about breastfeeding and, make contact prenatally with someone who is going to serve as your breastfeeding support, and kind of like figure that all out of who's who around our community or whichever community you might be in. Just so, because in the moments once you're home and you discover suddenly that you have a challenge, it's harder to kind of find that information at that point. So really, we see the best outcomes when people kind of we make touch with them prenatally somehow, and then everything's already set up. So in the moments of difficulty, they can just easily send a message and find support that way. And then again, on the birth end of it, once your baby's born, as soon as you even like remotely think you might have a problem, reach out then. It's never too early to reach out, because if we're going to confirm normal findings, that's great, because then we're confirming kind of what's normal, and what we're wanting to see to kind of meet that basic criteria, instead of kind of responding. So the earlier you can kind of reach out, the better. And as far as that whole, we really need to battle this as a society, that like cracked bleeding nipples are never normal. And we're not saying anyone's doing it wrong necessarily, just more the fact that that is like a red flag that you really need to find help. It's not just something you would push through, or not saying, sometimes some moms have cracked bleeding nipples and then things improve on their own over time. That does happen, but most of the time there's something that we need to kind of adjust, and it's the clue that we need to kind of dig deeper to find out what's going on. So pain, as far as like pain throughout the whole feeding, or any kind of nipple damage, or even just misshapen, flattened nipples, that's all enough to kind of reach out for that phone call. And also, like Cassie said, you're not limited to just kind of the certain options, and it's definitely okay to talk to someone. And if you don't, necessarily find not the answer you're looking for, because we don't want to state it that way, but if you feel like you haven't kind of gotten to the core of the problem, it's definitely okay to talk to someone else to kind of figure out what was missed and what areas we can impact. So, and none of us get offended about that. Like, I know all other people in positions, which I should mention, her last name changed, but Elizabeth Tompkins, that's at Integrated Services, can help some Medicaid moms in that setting. But none of us get offended if you call someone else to double check or to ask a different question, or, you know, at a different point. We all kind of understand that things are always changing. And so nobody's offended. It's definitely fine to reach out to more than one person.
Yeah, and I think that what you said a little bit earlier kind of ties into like the biggest part of my breastfeeding, you know, story is that, you know, to kind of speak up if you feel like something's not going right. And, you know, I feel like I kind of had to go through a couple different doctors and a couple different people before, you know, I found somebody that actually listened to me and, you know, was trying to help find answers. You know, I did have struggle with the tongue tie and, you know, a couple other issues and that kind of thing. So it's important to be our own advocates. And, you know, if you want that to work for you, then, you know, make it work sometimes.
Yeah, I talk a lot about that because it's really a big issue, you know, and often when I see people, they are at the end of their rope, so to speak, and have been through, Kylie's so cute, have been through a lot, and they feel like they're not being listened to by their pediatricians or their, you know, who, and that is kind of the thing, that's the thing for Cassie and I, is that we listen, that's like number one. We're like listening to what you say because we know moms know best. You're with your baby day in and day out. They're pretty much still part of you, you know, especially in the early first month of breastfeeding. And I've had moms of, you know, this is her 5th baby and she's coming to me knowing her baby's tongue tied, and everyone has told her that there's no tongue tie, but this is the 5th baby that she's breastfed and she can tell the difference. She knew, you know, and she needed someone to confirm that and help her figure out where to go to get it fixed. And so yeah, I wish pediatricians had more training in breastfeeding, or at least the ethics to refer appropriately, because I think that that isn't happening, and it hurts people. It hurts families, it hurts moms, it hurts babies, it hurts long-term breastfeeding rates. And, you know, it does matter. You know, it's hard to, in our society, it seems like, oh, well, you can just bottle feed is the answer, but that's not the answer. You know, the answer actually is figuring out the why. And I know I've probably said this to you directly, Rebecca, but you know, there's a reason your baby is struggling with breastfeeding. It's not just because some babies are terrible at breastfeeding. That is definitely not the case. There is a reason deep down in there somewhere. But oftentimes when pediatricians get asked about, well, why is this happening? They just don't have the answers, nor do they refer. And so I think that that's the part of the puzzle that needs addressed. But it's also difficult. And I definitely don't like to come across as you know, criticizing doctors, but at the same time, you know, I have an ethical responsibility based on my profession to speak up and tell people what I see. And I think they do too. And I really wish that they would kind of accept it a little more. So that's kind of some advice to give to your own doctors. I think the more we all talk to them about this, then maybe we can actually affect some change that way.
Yeah, and I can definitely echo from my own experiences that what you're saying is the kind of thing I tell my clients a lot as a doula, and just in different conversations I have with expecting moms. It's just that, like, for me, when I was breastfeeding my first, I kept having, for me, my specific situation was I just kept having mastitis over and over again. And I had to call my doctor to get an antibiotic. And then like a few weeks later, I was calling my doctor to get an antibiotic again. And only on the second time of mastitis and calling about it, the nurse at my doctor's office came back on the line and said, he said you should just stop breastfeeding because this is just not okay for your body. And I remember crying on the phone and being like, okay. And like, that was just the end of it. She's like, you just can't keep doing this to your body. You know, the doctor says you have to stop. And I got off the phone and I was just like, that can't be it. that can't be it, And so I went back to the lactation consultants from the hospital where I had given birth, and I called them, and they were like, oh, well, here. And they started going through all kinds of books and finding different ideas for me and things to try. And there was so much there that if I had not just been like, you know what, no, like, I'm going to dig deeper, I would have stopped at 6 weeks. And I ended up breastfeeding her for a full year. And another thought that I wanted to throw in too is just that I just cannot echo enough what you were saying about being prepared in advance and having your support team in place and knowing people that you can reach out to, professionals who are specialized in breastfeeding that you can reach out to. Because again, for me, I've had 4 babies, and every time I've had to talk with a lactation consultant, and I don't know how I would be breastfeeding any of them, or how I would have successfully breastfed any of them if I hadn't had those people who were experts who could talk me through each little issue and just troubleshoot things along the way with each one. Even after a year or 2 into nursing, different things do crop up. And so my heart breaks for those people, and I have friends who have said to me, well, I tried breastfeeding, but I had trouble, and I did everything I could besides contacting a lactation consultant. And so I really tried hard, and I just want to be like, oh, honey, you didn't even start, like, the lactation consultant is the start of getting help. But I think, would you agree that there's a misconception that talking to your OB or your pediatrician is going to give you all the information you need, or that there's a misconception that they are well trained in that?
Right. That's the misconception, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this situation of, and we apply this to like all kinds of other topics, but like, you don't know what you don't know, even though these are like well-educated people who know a lot of things. They just don't know these things. And it's kind of, this is the whole reason I got into the field myself, is because I gave birth to my oldest daughter, and I was young and knew nothing and hadn't made any contacts about breastfeeding prenatally, and I wish I had now. But I had a medical condition that I was taking medication for, and they told me I couldn't breastfeed because it would cause my baby brain development problems. And interestingly, they were like, at the hospital, this was in Columbus in 2001, Nova's a second year OU student now, but she, the pediatrician actually, and so it's not always the pediatrician, so I should not, specify that particular group, but the pediatrician and the lactation consultant were quoting the same study that the endocrinologist was quoting for why I couldn't breastfeed, but they were saying that I could. And so my 25-year-old self could not decipher that situation at all. And so I breastfed her once, and then came home to Athens where everyone around me was breastfeeding. And so I was not happy. It really kind of traumatized me, just having it cut like that so short. And then being in a community like ours that we see breastfeeding a lot, I kind of knew what I was missing because my friends were all breastfeeding. And that's what led me into this field. And the Birth Circle was 1000%, and the Leche League, of course, responsible for helping me figure out what I needed to do next time, as far as the birth of my son, who's 15, and then his breastfeeding experience. And both of those things are what led me into this field. So I'm pretty passionate about people having information so that they can make their own informed choices. And that really is a key point. No one can tell you over the phone that you have to stop breastfeeding, Kaylin. That is your choice. All of these are our choices, even in the hospital. And that's what's tricky when you're signing that kind of go into the hospital consent for giving birth. You kind of do lots of consenting with that one little signature, except for you don't receive a lot of the informed part. And you really cannot make a true informed decision if you don't have all of the information on both the benefits and the risks. And I think that really plays a huge role in kind of these situations. And the answer just needs to be understood, that it is just not, the answer is not to just stop breastfeeding. Because again, there is a reason. It's not just because. That's what's interesting about Jackie Wolf has done actually, I have her book right here because I've been kind of reading it, and this title makes you think, don't kill your baby. Okay, so that like makes you kind of freak out that this is like a guilt. Oh, that's a terrible message that would make moms feel guilty. But this is actually the public health messages in the late 1800s, early 1900s, because that's really the reality of the situation. And so this book actually was written the year my daughter was born, which is kind of interesting to me now. But anyways, it's really kind of interesting. And she just wrote a historical piece in the Journal of Human Lactation about how pediatricians really are involved in the early kind of formation of the commercial infant formula industry. And so it's a little bit interesting that they don't refer when necessary. And there have been some criticisms of the AAP, for example, American Academy of Pediatrics, taking money from the infant formula companies. And, Rebecca, you can probably speak to conflict of interest related issues and not taking gifts from the drug. That was about 10 years ago that all supposedly changed, but it's really still an issue. And so there's really some kind of bigger topics involved in what happens to us day to day that we're just seeing these little snippets when we give birth, and that's maybe when we are introduced to it. But this is like a really big problem and a worldwide problem, and it's been an ongoing multiple year. And I'll be honest that part of something that we have to face here, this is what white babies were going through at this time. This does not even touch on the true history of what slavery did to impact infant feeding in this country. And I'm just starting to dive into that. And it's thick, and it's part ethical, in my opinion. We're just seeing like a real snippet of it when we give birth. And even though it's really impactful to our lives, I think we can all say that about birth, and our breastfeeding experience impacts your life. So anyways, it's pretty interesting.
That is fascinating. I was thinking, would you be willing to put your main contact info, your website links and things in the chat on here before we hop off? And then of course we do have it at the Birth Circle website, which I'll make sure there's a link to in each place that we post this video after the fact. But yeah, if there's any of these books that you've mentioned, if you want to just put those in the chat too, that would be great. And just for any parents watching this, I want to make sure everybody knows too that the Birth Circle does have a lending library full of all kinds of wonderful books that are focused on parenting, childbirth, fertility, infertility issues, but also breastfeeding. And so there are lots of great books there. It is always a great idea to have your own books handy to refer to as well. I mean, there's Google, there is Cassie and Julie, there are the lactation consultants at the hospital, but it's also great to have your own little handbook nearby. So we do have some things that we loan out if you wanted to kind of dabble in some of them. I know normally at our in-person meetings, we have all of our stuff there for people to peruse through and borrow, but we still are happy to meet with people during all of this mess and loan things out and just kind of coordinate around our schedules to find a way to meet up and get things to you.
I'll chime in and say I'm fostering the Julie Library at my office, so if there's anything that anyone needs, I can get that to people. And they can pick either I've got Mama Friend bin at my house, or I can meet people too wherever. So
cool. That's great. And I also, it resonated with me when you said, that it's not just pediatricians or OBs that we're trying to pick on that, don't necessarily have all of the accurate data and evidence, but also it's good to just be mindful that your mom, even if your mom had a great breastfeeding experience, let's say, or a terrible breastfeeding experience, or she never breastfed, or your friend or a bunch of people on Facebook or whatever, they are also not necessarily experts. So, take all of the advice and things, the horror stories and things that you hear from others with a grain of salt, and just know that just because one person says, well, this is what happened to me, that's what'll happen to you, is not necessarily the case. And they may not have had all of the support and resources that could have helped them have a much more positive experience in the end. So just bear that in mind as you're hearing all the different things from all these different people and all the voices that, going to the experts is the thing to do with all those questions.
Compared to when I started with breastfeeding support, which was 2006, my 15-year-old was like under a year old at the time. The grandma that I used to see then in my peer work, that aged grandma, is definitely different than the grandma that I see today of my clients. I don't know what you have to add to that, Cassie, but it's really quite interesting because a lot of the grandmas are closer to my age or, pretty just a little older than me, whereas before it was like the grandmas were like my mom's age that were coming, and it's kind of really into the younger moms are more supportive. Just to clarify it, that's become like a little bit easier, even though you're right, like that family dynamic is it impacts things a lot. And so I do, and I know Cassie will probably talk to dads, and like myself, I love to talk to dads about supporting breastfeeding moms and grandmas and everybody. I always feel like we have done such a great job educating the moms that moms know what they want to do. It's just more of a matter of everybody else helping out and giving appropriate care or helping them find appropriate care, rather than really, the moms don't need to be convinced they get these things. I think, it's just more about society now that we really need to alter, that part.
Or even just things like where if a expecting mom, if her mom is super supportive of breastfeeding and maybe had a great experience and never had any issues at all, she just may not have some of the insights to give because she didn't run into whatever problem you might run into. And, I've heard of some parents being really discouraged because they have this problem that their mom never had, so they think that maybe it just doesn't work for them or whatever, and that's not necessarily the case either.
Or assuming that it won't work for themselves because their moms couldn't breastfeed, and so that must be the reason that but again, really it's usually more related to kind of not being able to navigate the landscape to find the true help that can actually help you fix that problem.
Yeah. And I have a friend who, one story she shares a lot is about how when she was pregnant with her first, she was looking on all the groups online and seeing all these things about what to do for needing to boost your supply. So she was like really just expecting that she was going to need to do all this work to make sure that her milk supply was high and that it was good and that it was probably going to be a battle. And so she was buying like the brewer's yeast and buying all the things to try to make sure she would be able to boost her milk supply really well. And then she was a huge overproducer.
Right.
And then she was like, oh, I didn't even know this was a thing. How do I deal with this? And because people don't talk about that very often. I didn't know that was a problem.
It is. And I will say to that point that a lot of the pictures and, visuals that we see on social media about pump amounts and freezers stashes that are like ginormous, that is really not normal production. I think that the what's really normal, 1.5 to 3 ounces combined double pumping per session is normal. And that's really, people feel like they're not producing. They'll call me and say, I'm only producing like 4 ounces. And I'm like, that fits my definition of appropriate for that moment. Sometimes babies nurse more and take more than that when they're direct nursing. But a pump is kind of it's not our ideal way to get milk out of the breast. So sometimes the numbers are lower because of that. And then we're also just not all super producers. I just picture like some of those visuals I've seen online of like a freezer full, like I pumped like 7,000 ounces or whatever, and it's in a freezer. It's, just kind of remembering that that's really not normal for most people. And then most people are kind of closer to where they should be than they realize, I think.
And you guys are fantastic for helping come alongside moms and just reassure them of that. Did anybody else have any questions or things they wanted to throw into the conversation? Okay, well, thank you both, Julie and Cassie, so much for your time and for being willing to hop on here and share about the things you do. We're so honored to be able to be I guess, a platform for you guys to be able to share some of that and really try to connect other moms and parents and their support systems to you guys and to all the great resources that are in our area.
Well, I appreciate the Birth Circle because I really feel, it was definitely instrumental in me figuring this out. And I think Cassie might have had a similar experience. So it's super valuable, and I thank you guys for keeping it going, and it's important. So thank you for having me and Cassie.
Yeah, absolutely. So for anyone watching, of course, remember you can always check out www.athensbirthcircle.com. That's where we try to keep an updated list of local resources related to breastfeeding, parenting, birth, just all the things. And I'm going to try to put links to all these things, these links that Cassie and Julie just shared. I'll try to put them along with this video in the comments in each place that we posted. I'm sure we'll be putting this on YouTube, Facebook, and anything else we end up coming up with. And so I'll try to put these resources all underneath there as well. But if you're on here now, be sure to check the chat for the links and resources that Julie and Cassie both shared. And feel free to message us at the Birth Circle through our Facebook page at any time if you have questions or just want to be quickly connected with somebody. We can, of course, put you right in touch with Julie or Cassie or whatever else that you might be looking for. All right, guys. Well, everyone have a great rest of the evening. Thank you all so much for hopping on. And if you're watching this later, thanks so much for watching. I hope you guys have a great rest of the day.
You too. Thanks.
Bye.
Have a good night, everybody.
You too.